we're going to wait a minute or two to allow the audience to come into the panel from the waiting room. I'll start by thanking everyone out there for hanging in with us through our technology glitch. Hello and welcome to the Center for the Arts and Humanities in the College of Arts and Sciences at Santa Clara University. I'm Michelle Burnham, Director of the Center, and along with my colleague and Associate Director, Amy Randall, I want to thank you for joining us for today's panel, Perspectives from the Arts on Connection and Healing in a Moment of Grief and Uncertainty. This panel is part of an ongoing series called The Urgency of Now, which we began last year, and which is designed to respond to current events that impact us on campus, in our communities, and in the world. And the series brings together scholars and artists to offer perspectives on these events. This particular panel was put together at the end of last quarter at an especially challenging moment on our campus. The transition back to campus from online instruction was at least as hard as it was welcome. And the ongoing stress and uncertainty that we're all experiencing was really a burden that we carried. And we saw the impact of that burden in the struggle with mental health among students, in the tragic loss of life, and in the grief that we felt in the wake of that loss. So today we're bringing together faculty who are also working artists to reflect on the role that the arts can play at a moment like this. One of our panelists is unable to attend today, so we're missing Leticia, Ridley, but I am thrilled to introduce our three panelists and terrific colleagues. Kai Harris is an assistant professor in the English department. She teaches courses in the creative writing program, including fiction writing and new forms for creative writing. Her first novel has just been published by Tiny Reparations, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. It's called What the Fireflies Knew, and it's coming out any day now on February 1st. Kai's also published poetry, personal essays, and academic articles, and her recent research and teaching focuses on trauma-aware self-care, on youth-centered social justice and activism, coming-of-age stories for women of color, and mental health awareness in the Black community. And Kai, I just saw some of the blurbs for your new novel, and like amazing, it's so exciting. Pancho Jiménez is a senior lecturer in the Department of Art and Art History. He teaches studio art courses in ceramic sculpture and three-dimensional design. He also serves as the director for the Art and Art History Department Gallery, and he's an academic advisor in the Drama Advising and Learning Resource Center. Pancho's work draws on the densely carved textures of organic and geometric designs and hieroglyphs that are found in ancient indigenous civilizations in Mexico. His most recent work explores the elusiveness of dreams and memory by joining together molded forms in unlikely combinations. He's exhibited nationally and internationally in museums, at universities, and in commercial galleries and civic spaces. Bruno Ruviaro is associate professor and chair of the music department. He teaches courses in composition, music theory, and electronic music. He also directs SCLORC, the Santa Clara Laptop Orchestra. Bruno's originally from Brazil, and in addition to being a composer and performer, he's interested in acoustic ecology, soundscape studies, and the intersection of speech and music. You can listen to and download some of Bruno's works at brunoruviaro.com. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to start. I'll start with Pancho, but this is a question that I hope all of you will respond to. And it's kind of got two parts to it, and I'm just going to start with the first one, which is to ask you, what frame of mind and body the practice of making art, right, whether that's writing or composing music or designing, puts you into? What happens to your mind and your body in that moment?
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you, Michelle. I want to thank you and Amy for your work with the center, and also want to thank Britt for organizing all of us. So thank you. I think for me, on good days, art puts me in a really contemplative frame of mind. This allows me to reflect in a focused, kind of quiet manner on my thoughts, feelings, and concerns about challenging and troubling times, as well as comforting and enjoyable times. I think art gives me a space to express my inner feelings, thoughts, and emotions and concerns. And it's my hope that my art kind of engages viewers to reflect on their own experiences, circumstances, and feelings. Accessing this frame of mind, as I alluded to when I first started talking, doesn't happen like turning on and off a switch. For me, it's very much embedded in my art practice. So as best I can, I try to work at least 5 days a week on my art. And I think this ritual, this work, puts me in a frame of mind. It allows me to consider whether or not an idea, feeling, concern really merits the energy that is required from making a piece or for making a piece. And so when I say merits, I guess what I'm really talking about is authenticity. Is it coming from an internal place, or is it coming from an external place? And so I found that for myself, regardless of topic, motivation through an internal motivation derives much stronger work than external motivation. And I found that with my students, certainly. I don't know if that gets at the question, but.
Thanks, Pancho. Kai, do you want to enter in here? And let me just add to this question, what the relationship is for the three of you between this act of creative production and the presence of, right, sort of difficult or challenging feelings or thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So for me as a creative writer, I think that writing itself tends to put me in a pretty calm and centered state of mind, but that depends heavily on what type of writing I'm doing. So obviously, if I'm under deadline and trying to get something finished up, I'm probably not as calm and centered as I would like to be. But I practice similarly to Pancho. I attempt to write daily. And a lot of times that is free writing, meaning just writing for periods of time without stopping. That's also journaling. I have, a journaling habit every morning that allows me to focus on different aspects of my own well-being through writing. I think ultimately, creative production, creative writing, those things tend to put me in a space of mindfulness. It feels to me like I become very present. I have to be very present because I'm there with the page, with my pen, with my computer, what have you. And in that moment, that's all that's happening. At least that's what I aim for. So I think for me, there's a great possibility for creative production to put us in these spaces of mindfulness, of calm, of center, even in the midst of trauma, of turmoil, grief. I think it's a way for us to almost step into another space, I guess, and say, I am here. I'm here with the page. I'm here with my words, and I'm producing.
Really interesting to me that both of you have a very ritualized, right, sort of predictable schedule for this practice as well. Bruno, what's your experience like?
Thank you, Michelle. first of all, and I now want so much to have a ritual like the two of you, Kai and Pancho. I mean, I always knew that, of course, being a pianist from background, that like if you stop playing, it just doesn't happen anymore. So you have to have the consistency and ritual. But, you know, maybe after I end my music department chair time, I can reinstate my rituals. But I totally agree, and I share some of the same experiences, like the importance of the ritual, the consistency, but also like the effects that has, like when you're in the flow, however you want to call it, like you were working with your thing, whether it's, you know, visual arts or writing or music in my case. I definitely share that idea, what Kai said, the mindful moment, or you feel present with that thing and you're focused and you're centered most of the time. One interesting thing that I just, you know, I'm noticing that I could add to the picture is that in music, of course, a lot of times I can be the solitary composer working just by myself, like a writer or a sculptor. But there's the whole other aspect in music of playing music with others, making music together. And that has become such an important part. I mean, I tended to be over the years, in the past, I was the composer working alone by myself, just by myself, writing music on paper or making it happen on the computer. But over the last 10 years, thanks, you know, after I came to Santa Clara and I created the laptop orchestra, that thing which started as a class became, to me, and I think I can safely say for my students as well, such a, like an exciting and precious space of creativity to happen, because we're making electronic music together. And, you know, I ask my students to write journals and diary entries every time we meet as a class, as a rehearsal, basically for the group. And many times by now over the years, people tell me how they come to Sklork, that's the name of our laptop orchestra, and they feel all sorts of descriptors they use, like, you know, a space that they feel creative, they feel safe, they feel like able to connect with others. And we spend sometimes a whole hour just playing without saying a word. That has happened a few times. But the connection is so real when you're playing together with others. And of course, you can say the same for choir, orchestra, jazz, bands, all of that. So there's that interesting aspect of like connecting with others without having to say a word, and you're just sharing creativity and musical ideas on the spot, especially if you're improvising like I like to do. So yeah, I think that's mostly what I wanted to share. So in music, you have the two sides, the alone time with your music, but also the connecting right now with people through sound, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I picking up on that idea, Bruno. I wonder whether, Pancho and Kai, for you, there is also a feeling of being in a space with others, whether you're actually physically there with them or not. And one of the things that struck me listening to all of you about this sort of centeredness and mindfulness that comes along with entering into the creative process is this feeling that you're kind of there with yourself and your thoughts and feelings, but at the same time, somehow like freed from them. And so I think I'll just kind of open things up to any of you who might want to respond to either that last piece of it or to this kind of community element that Bruno's brought into the conversation.
Two things. One, in listening to Kai speak and Bruno, I was reminded of something that an artist once said to me. He said, "Inspiration will strike, but you have to be in the studio for it to find you." So, you know, I think far too often the stereotype of an artist is kind of we're always making, right? But you really, to authentically be mindful and do your work, you have to be. It's a practice. Michelle, the last part of your question, you asked when you're in that space, it's freeing. Is that the way you phrased it? Is that right?
I just got the impression listening to you that entering into the process of creative production puts you in touch with what you're thinking and feeling. But at the same time, I almost got the sense that it was disburdening you of it in some way, maybe because you're reflecting on it, which takes it out of yourself in a way that you're able to kind of dialogue with in some way. So that's kind of the experience that I was picking up on.
Yeah, but for me, it's an opportunity to peel back the noise of the day or the noise of other concerns. And you come to a crossroads, and that crossroads is, am I going to enter into a working relationship with a piece of artwork that is going to last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months? And so when you're going to commit that kind of time, mentally, you have to be very clear, or you have to be very focused on what it is that is most important to you about making this work. Because I tell my students, art is terribly honest. So I say, if you come to class with an idea that you made up as you came through the door, you're going to get very frustrated making that work over this week and a half that you're going to have to make it. But if you give it some time to kind of germinate and think through, and it becomes a very honest and authentic idea for you, the energy that the work is going to require to be good is not going to be taxing. It becomes almost joyful. I don't know if that kind of gets at it a little bit, but.
I can just add in regards to community that a lot of the writing that I do, I often seek that sense of community as well. So I have my daily practice that's individual, but I also throughout the week have several different days where I'm in writing groups or writing partnerships with other people, right now via Zoom, but just being in space together in writing. There is, just as Bruno was reflecting on, a different feeling that comes from that as well. And I've tried that out in my classroom as well with my students. We work on, we have a journaling project that we're working on together over the course of the quarter. And I've had several students explain to me how writing in that journal allowed them to do both things, to process things that were going on in real time, to have a space to put those things. And in doing so, almost having this feeling of release, of cathartic release, of just getting that kind of out of their mind onto the page and making it real and showing themselves that this is something that I'm feeling and I can process it, I can talk about it. So the community aspect and being able to both put things down, reflect on them, think about them, but then also let them out and kind of move through them. I think all of that is very important.
One thing, and I don't mean to take too much, but one thing I love to see in class is when we do group critiques, and I have the students look at one another's work and then give each other feedback. And ultimately that creates the kind of community Bruno's referring to. And it's just fun to watch them move from kind of that structured critique to really asking for feedback from one another on a regular basis in class. So, yeah.
And Michelle, if I can just throw one more thing. We talked a lot about the mind, but you also asked about the body, like how it feels. And one thing that I remember very much, like from the best moments when I was making something, and like Pancho said, it was finding the joy of just working on the thing, whatever it was, either alone or with others. Sometimes, and I'm sure this is a shared experience with, if not some of the panelists, maybe other artists for sure, like I sometimes would forget to have lunch or to have food and just keep going for hours. And then you realize, oh, maybe I should go have some food or, whatever, right? So it is that level of, and I'm saying that making art is unhealthy. I'm just saying, like, it puts you in a space that, like, the priority becomes like different, and your metabolism works in a different way. You don't feel bad. You just feel like I'm flowing into this thing. The second and last thing I wanted to add, and I think maybe all of us said in some way this similar things about how much time seems to be suspended when you are doing the thing. And I wanted also to point out, it's been like an ongoing realization and struggle of mine and many people, I think, to realize that our whole lives are structured on a measure of time and constraints of time that go against this very need of making art. That is like, I need to have like a certain amount of free time for me to do things and be able to think through certain ideas, right? Not always, even though we try to make our rituals, but like if I say, I'm going to do this for 1 hour every morning, it's amazing, but sometimes it's in friction with the very needs of the act of making the art or making the music, right? And I think college, work, life, the constraints of modern life and our economy and society, all like kind of goes against that need for free time that I think not just us here, but anybody who wants to enter into any creative space, like you run into that wall, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that, Bruno, and all of you. And that sense of being freed from the constraints and pressures and burdens of time, like that in and of itself can have a really healing kind of force, I think. And yeah, thank you for bringing us back to the body and thinking about what happens to our bodies in the creative process. I'm going to give you guys a slightly different type of question now to ask you if you can think of particular examples of works of art, creative productions, either ones that you've created yourself or ones that have been created by others, maybe piece of writing, a sculpture or a painting or a drawing, a theatrical performance or a dance, a particular work of music that has helped you process grief or loss or trauma. Kai, do you want to start us off on this?
Yeah, so conveniently, I can talk about my book. So the book is a coming of age story, and people often ask me if it's my story, which would make sense because I built the main character based on myself for the most part, but it's not my story. So in a lot of ways, I fictionalized things that happened to me to in an effort to still process things myself, but not kind of fully have like my story on the page. So for example, the main character is dealing with the loss of her father. For her, this loss has occurred as an 11-year-old in a very different manner. But in writing about it, in having her think through memories with her father and what that loss feels like, it helped me to process the loss of my own father, which happened for me when I was, 22 years old after college. So it's a completely different kind of loss. But I found that in writing her loss, I was able to process my own in a lot of ways. Similarly, the grandfather character in the book, was based off of my own grandfather who passed away when I was actually the age of that character. So I think in some ways I shifted the story, but I also still left remnants of my own trauma, my own grief, my own loss. And so in writing through those things, I learned so much about myself, about how I was feeling, where I was at. I processed in ways that I hadn't in all of the years since those losses. I thought about things that I had never thought about. And so I think that's a pretty easy example for me of doing that myself. But also, I work with my students in the classroom, and I think that we do similar things. We do meditative free writes in class where we combine a meditative session with a free write. And I've had students telling me in class or after class that they were able to work through a trauma or write about a loss or things that they normally don't talk about, try not to think about, definitely don't write about. But by combining this idea of free writing with this meditative state, and I think in some ways it allows them to get those things out to finally be able to process them. So that would be the examples that I would say stand out for me the most, is just the ways that I've been able to work with my students and process in the classroom by combining writing with meditation, and then also in the writing of the novel.
One thing I'm appreciating from your description is that there's no expiration date on the opportunity that this process provides for us. It's not as if, right, you have to do it immediately. It could be years, decades later, and the benefit, the value is still there. Pancho, how about you?
Sure. I too will talk about my work a little bit. What I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen, and I would imagine I know the audience could see it, but I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you two works of art in which I kind of made something to process some pretty strong feelings, and then I'm going to show you some student work. So let me just share my screen, and then I'll say the proverbial, can you see my screen here? Okay, can you all see my screen?
Not yet. While you're working on that, Pancho, it's a good time for me to just remind the audience to please ask any questions that you have of the panelists in the Q&A function that's on the bottom of your screen. And given the particular content of this panel, we'd actually really like to encourage and invite you also to share your own experiences. Again, is there a particular work of art that has provided a sense of solace, performed some healing for you? What is your own creative process like? Please feel free to access that at any point.
So I'm guessing you guys are not seeing my screen, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, because I'm hitting the share. Okay, maybe window. Are you seeing it now?
No.
I wonder if I don't have privileges to share for some reason.
If you would like to maybe drop a link in the chat to our host, Britt, she can try and pull that up. Okay. And maybe while that's unfolding, just kind of talk us through.
Well, actually, maybe if you could go to Bruno, and maybe I could, because it's no fun to see it without the picture.
Absolutely, yes. Bruno, you're on. Are there any particular works of art that have served a kind of healing function for you?
Sure. I'm going to go different way and actually talk about a work by my students that I thought was really amazing, and I'll just describe a little bit how that worked in the context of the laptop orchestra. And I have links to share. I'll throw those in the chat for people to open YouTube tracks they can listen to later if they want. But basically, this is like something that never happened before in the group, in the laptop orchestra. But a group of students, this was like before, and they continued through the COVID years. And I'm really proud that I was able to be a mentor and help them through the process. So Michael Noonan, Asta Chawla, and Gia Siao, 3 students that came in at different points of their undergraduate in the laptop orchestra. Some of them music majors, others with very little musical experience, but they all met, and I always break up the orchestra into small groups to make creative projects, right? So they didn't know each other. They met in their first year in the laptop orchestra in 2020, just before the pandemic actually hit. And they created a piece together. It was a small piece, their first piece together, electronic piece called Wake Up. And in that piece, they reflected about mental health and the difficulties that they saw in the transition from like childhood time, living at home, to young adulthood. So it was a very interesting piece, about 7 minutes long. And the piece was never performed because right away when we were supposed to have the concert, that was the week of shelter in place that happened, right? But we did have a recording we kept for ourselves as a documentation. Next year, in the middle of the pandemic, we had laptop orchestra again online. The 3 of them re-enrolled, and they wanted to continue. They knew already they wanted to continue working as a group. And so they did, and they created a second installment of the same piece they called Wake Up Part 2, which was like a much more ambitious piece. It was almost like a half an hour long of music. And they really poured their hearts into making that. It was really impressive to see. And in that piece, in the middle of the pandemic, they made it their theme to be reflecting about social isolation, quarantining, the political nightmare of the country, and all of that went into their piece through sounds and voices and samples from other music. Almost like it was a harsh and beautiful, another, kind of almost like a symphony of sorts, with noises and soothing sounds and poetry, all sorts of stuff. And finally, we presented that in a live YouTube concert, which I'll share the link in a second. And finally, they met again in the recent last offering of Sklark in the fall, which we did hybrid, partially in person, partially online. They came again. They're all about to graduate. They're graduating now, basically. So that was kind of their culmination. And they made a third installment of the piece, Wake Up Part 3. So it became a trilogy in a way. And they continue to speaking about, through sounds, about anxieties of like coming out of social isolation, kind of like what you said, Michelle, like the coming back in person was both welcome and also hard in the same amounts, perhaps. They talked about the lingering threat of COVID, the fears about, and also fears about what's ahead after their graduation in this world. And they tied it up with a whole reflection about climate change that ends the piece in a sort of, I'll let you watch the piece later. Anybody can watch with the link later, but a very interesting sonic reflection of what are we even going to have as by way of a future, right? So that was a really exciting thing for me to see, that evolution of the process, how those three students were working together, finding their overlaps, and creating this piece of work that addressed so many things in the same work. I'll throw those links in the chat and people can watch later. They are kind of long pieces.
Thank you, Bruno. That sounds amazing, both from the perspective of creation, the collaboration of it, but then they leave behind this legacy of this work of art that can be enjoyed by others, but that also offers a different kind of healing for audience members. Pancho, have you got the screen share worked out?
I hope so. So let me see. Screen share. Okay. Yeah, you can see it now, okay, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let me move you all out of this way and share. Okay. Oh, wait. I didn't want to do that. I want slideshow. Okay. So I'm going to show you two of my own pieces, which reflect some concerns of mine or things that I care deeply about. And then I'm going to show you some work that students produce. So one thing that has troubled is not even a good enough word to describe it. One thing that really, really concerns me is school shootings. And partly, I mean, as a teacher, certainly, and as a parent. And so I've made a number of pieces that kind of speak to this. And so this particular piece is 3 rather large crayons. So they're about a little over 2.5 feet. And then embedded in the colored area of the crayon are guns. Mm-hmm. And so, and they are the caliber of gun that is classically used in mass shootings. For me, I just can't imagine being a 4th or 5th grader and having to go through active shooter drills. It kind of tears at my heart quite a bit. And, school's supposed to be a place where you feel safe, especially as a young child. You feel safe, you're meant to explore, you're meant to color, you're meant to do art. But I would imagine that doing a drill once a month or once every 2 months where you have to perform certain activities or duties because there's a chance somebody may shoot you, can really change the way you experience school. Another thing that I think really impacted all of us 2 summers ago was the death of George Floyd. And so during that summer, there was a lot of focus on the amount of time that knee was held to Mr. Floyd's neck. And it was 8:46 at the time. It was 8 minutes, 46 seconds. After the trial, it was revealed that it was actually 9 minutes and 29 seconds. But I made this piece to kind of memorialize that time. So I made the 8 with the 46, and then on the side of the 8 and the 46, there are multiple heads and figures gasping for air. So, and the piece is titled Last Gasp. So now I want to talk a little bit about student work. Students make work about a variety of topics. I've chosen just a few themes that they tend to gravitate towards. And so the first one is kind of identity. So in the piece on the left, the student felt like they were having to conform into a box. And so that's that kind of square at the base of this piece. But in an attempt to try to conform, they felt like their self was melting away. On the right, this student wanted to talk a little bit about how her life and medication kind of intersect, and that taking her medication has become tantamount to, pouring her cereal in the morning. Oopsie, skipped one. Students also are very concerned about the environment. And so I get a lot of pieces about the environment. And so here's an example of one. So you have a fish with a gas mask on. And then certainly about relationships. So you have an anatomically correct heart on the left. And then I think really a memorial to a lost relationship or a damaged or ended relationship on the right. So yeah. And then sometimes students will just make work that focuses on a specific emotion. So, that's the kind of, that's some of the ways I try to use art to express what troubles me or what concerns me, and then some examples of how that maybe plays out for students.
Those are beautiful. Thank you for sharing those, Pancho, and looking at all of them, including yours, kind of made me realize that the experience of sort of viewing, watching, listening to art can often invite us both to get really close and see the details, like the guns that are the images of guns that are embedded in those crayons. You don't see unless you come up close. But then there are other things you don't see unless you back away and kind of see it from a distance. And I think the same could be said of how we experience writing and music as well, right? We have these opportunities to kind of zoom in and pay attention to a level of detail. And then we also have the opportunity to kind of stand back and let the whole sort of wash over us. And I guess I wonder whether that kind of dualism that's built into the same experience is part of what allows art to work on us and our feelings and our thoughts in the way that it does. And maybe I'll use that as a way of transitioning into a next question, which is about this experience of viewing art, music, performance, or writing. How for you has that experience kind of opened up possibilities? Maybe by offering alternative ways of seeing things for navigating through trauma, mourning, or healing. One of you want to come in first on this?
Well, I can just say for me as a writer, I think that it's always very therapeutic for me to read. Excuse me, to, I guess, turn to the other side of my writing and read stuff that's already written by authors who help me to, again, process and understand the things that I'm trying to navigate. So there are certain books that have absolutely been a part of my healing journey. Whether that's, there's a book called Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And that book, the main character is a teenage Black girl who is dealing with the loss of her mother. as she is learning that she is going to become a mother. And this all happens like right in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. So we have, trauma and loss and grief all together. And this character, through her own voice, is navigating it. And we're right there with her, rooting her on and feeling our own things. So I love just engaging in writing that affects me in that way, that allows me to see myself, that allows me to see my own trauma and grief and I guess paths to healing in ways that I maybe am not able to see before I start that reading journey.
Bruno, you want to come in on this?
Yes. I wanted to share. I mean, in music, it's kind of the first one of the first points of contact with music, and students come to my class, other classes. It's always a common point of conversation. How people find, people with no music background or no musical training. Let's say everybody has a musical background, I think, in some way or another. If you ever listen to any piece of music, but that music always has connected people, especially songs with lyrics, but of course music without lyrics, about love, struggle, death, or hope. And there's always that connection you make with others through these topics and the sounds that a piece of music presents. Yeah. I also think beyond connecting like people, like maybe you and the musician that you love that is playing the music or singing the song, I always like to think about that music is also connecting us further with history, with traditions that go way past, and with collective and personal memories. So music has also that memory component that I think it's pretty important in processing, whatever it may be that someone is going through. So in a way, it's a kind of a conversation with others. I think that are alive now or that lived in the past in a certain way through sounds. I want to just finish sharing one other story from the music department on this question, that it's been very evident through the COVID time that, especially our ensembles, the choir, the orchestra, the jazz combos, laptop orchestra, the very essence of making music is that we want to be together and make music together. And all of a sudden we had to be sheltering in place, and there's no Zoom that could replace any of that experience. And it was extremely destructive for the ensembles. I mean, we tried everything we could, and many of us succeeded in a number of ways to still find a way to be musical together in the most unlikely circumstances and technological limitations, right? But everybody was searching that, how can we make this happen, to be together and make music, even if it's not sounding the way we know it could sound when we are in the same room, right? So that's one aspect. Musicians kept trying and kept going at it, because of that need to connect and to make it, our way of expression, right? And finally, the other thing I want to share is also last fall, at the very end, the tough week 10 that you described, Michelle, there were 2 concerts left in our season, the laptop orchestra and the Festival of Lights with the choir, which is especially the Festival of Lights. It's a decades-long event at Santa Clara that encompasses songs celebrating the end of the year, many, not just Christmas, but many traditions, end of the year, etc., through the choirs. And of course, with the climate of week 10, after we all learned about the loss of another student, everybody had a Monday with a lot of mixed feelings about should we even go ahead and make those concerts happen, right? In fact, we got some emails from some people who had the valid question to us: why are you even going to have these concerts? We should not have any concert at all. Cancel everything. And Scott, my colleague, choir director, and I, who both of us had our concerts coming, we gave some hard thinking about this, and we said, no, we need to go ahead with these concerts, because it's true that on the one hand, it doesn't feel right. The concerts are not about we have to reframe the concerts to make them be spaces for people to be together and to process that moment together. And many of the students we talked to in the ensembles, we gave them the choice. If you feel this is not right for you, you can totally not be part of the concert and process in some different way. but most or the majority of the students said, no, we need to do this. We want to do this.
Mhm.
So for the singers, the laptop players themselves, and for the audience members, we also got feedback later. Like for many, this was like one of the occasions of that week that they had to be in community and to actually process all that was happening through those musical events that we reframed them. We made open each concert with an explicit brief speech about what was happening and how we were thinking about the concerts. And I think it was the right thing to do to reframe our art at that time and still make it happen, even though there was some sense that maybe we should just cancel, but we didn't cancel.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Bruno. I'm sure that like every department and instructor experienced some version of that, but it's a really nice reminder about why we do these things and create these things to begin with. And right, maybe that just exposed sort of the truth. It's not about the performance, it's about the occasion to gather and to be together and to connect. And that music provided the catalyst for something that was really necessary, I think, for everybody at that time. And I also want to thank you for kind of reminding us about like the persistence of historical forms of trauma and grief. So, we were talking before about how there's kind of like no expiration date in the creative process for dealing with our own personal experiences, but the same is true for forms of trauma that kind of get carried on intergenerationally. Actually, Pancho, coming across the description of your own work and which I shared in the beginning as part of your bio, right? That connection to indigenous cultures in Mexico, that almost feels like a way of kind of staying connected to that material. Do you have any thoughts either on that or just on this experience of what viewing or participating in a show or an exhibit does for us?
I think any time you engage with a work of art, whether it's writing, music, visual, ultimately you find yourself connecting with the work in a way that, well, in some ways it will show a bit of a mirror to you, or it will allow you to engage with what the artist is trying to communicate, and then that engagement then gives you the space or the okay, so to speak, to begin to think about how your own experience then resonates or dovetails with what the artist is trying to give back. I don't know if I made myself totally clear. So you kind of reflect when you're viewing the artwork, inevitably, ideally, you begin to reflect not only on what the artist is saying, but on how your own experiences then intersect with what the artist is saying or resonate in some way with the artist is saying. And I think that experience helps you make sense of what can be very confusing, very overwhelming feelings, especially around trauma, mourning, and healing. I'd also want to add to that idea of time. Last year, when we went into lockdown, there was a good deal of interest and energy in Corona art. And I was approached, I would love to see if you could document what the students are making in relationship to how they're feeling about Corona and the lockdown, or COVID rather. And surprisingly initially, but as I thought about it, it made complete sense. My students were not interested in all about making art about COVID. Sometimes being able to reflect thoughtfully or being able to engage wholly with an issue or a concern, you need distance. And I think, so that idea became very evident and very apparent to the students in class. I would suggest, they have assignments, but then they have some open-ended assignments, and I'd make some suggestions. And I'd say every time I even approach the edge of something like lockdown or COVID, there was oh no, I'm sick of it, is oftentimes what they say. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. I need another. I want to talk about this, or I want to talk about that. So, I think that gets back to the expiration date, but I also think it should remind us of our expectations, especially as adults, with the young adults who we're teaching, in that, for some, it may be a healing process, or it may be, it may help them heal to initially reflect on what has just happened, either if it's last quarter or if it's, the pandemic. But we have to remember that their life experience is rather short, and that they may need some distance. And I think we have to give them that space, and not always look to see, or ask them, okay, everybody write about your hate of Corona or COVID or the trauma after the spring quarter. You have to let them, authentic work gets met at an appropriate time and place, and we have to give them that. I don't know, it's just my little side note.
What we might also consider that sometimes it's the distance from something, or sometimes it's the directness of the approach. So it was interesting to me that a number of your students are kind of responding to the climate crisis in their art, for example. And then Bruno, that became really seemed to be a central factor in your students' composition work as well. We've probably all read quite a lot about this sense of eco-anxiety that's part of our culture, and I think maybe especially felt amongst younger people, including our students. Sometimes maybe approaching a sense of stress or grief metonymically, right? Kind of. They may be dealing in some ways with what they're feeling about COVID by expressing it through a kind of connected but not quite the same source. So that seems like a kind of an interesting possibility. I want to bring in some of the questions that are coming in from our audience for you guys. And so this was a question for Kai, but I think we can open it up to everybody in some respects. It was a question about what kind of prompts you use, Kai, in order to get students into, doing some meditative writing. And maybe Pancho and Bruno, you have similar kinds of exercises in your own media for students. But let's start with Kai.
Yeah, so the meditative free write, when I first introduced it to the class, I use slides, very brief slides that just explain what we're about to do. So because I understand that some people in the class may have never tried meditation before, we spend a bit of time talking about meditation, what it is, how it works. I keep things pretty simple for this session. So all that I'm asking them to do is to find a comfortable position. I talk through a couple techniques. I talk about breath work and, kind of thinking through paying attention to our breath, paying attention to where our breath is entering our body at the nose and through our mouths and in our belly and everywhere that we can feel it, and just kind of tracking that. I talk about body scanning and, paying attention to different parts of our body and seeing how we're feeling. I turn on there's a YouTube video that I use that's just a bit of a meditation. It's more music than anything else. It's not like a guided meditation. And while we're listening to the music, I ask them to focus on a few things. So I want them to first kind of get themselves into this calm state, find their comfortable position, start to pay attention to their breath, pay attention to their body. As they're starting to feel settled into that, I want them to shift pretty quickly into free writing. And I want them to use the free write to actually write about the experience of the meditation. So I'll ask them, questions. I'll give them a variety of questions that they can respond to, such as, what does it feel like to pay attention to your breath in the ways that you are? How does your body feel? What does the silence, if you're being silent, right? What does that silence feel like? How does it feel? How does it sound? As weird as I guess that question is. But I'm just asking them specific questions to get them to think through that process of meditation. And they're just writing it all out. And, with every free write, I'm asking them to just get the words on the page as quickly as they can. And so what I found from my students after doing this exercise is that it allows them to feel centered, to feel calm, to enter kind of this state of peace, of being connected to their body. The things that they write in their free write sometimes are things that they want to return to later. Sometimes during that free write, they write something that sticks out to them, and then they think this is something I want to explore creatively. And sometimes it's just for processing. Maybe they'll never open up this page again for any reason, but it was just a moment for them to take a pause and process.
Bruno or Pancho, do you have any prompts that you offer students? I actually find it very interesting, Kai, that your writing prompt incorporates music, right, as a kind of setting. I like that kind of interdimensionality to it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and fascinating topic to me too. I will offer maybe 2 or 3 quick examples, things I've been trying lately or over the years. In the laptop orchestra, we do a lot of improvisation together. And one of the things that for some people who have been improvising for longer, that's more like a known thing. But if you're new to improvising together, sometimes people come feeling that they need to be playing all the time, otherwise they're not participating. And it's always a click when we talk a lot about listening, and then we say, sometimes just listening to what's happening in the ensemble for 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes, you can drop off your sound and just be listening for an extended period of time. And then you come in later. And when people realize that being silent and listening can be just as great or sometimes even better than making sound all the time. And that leads people into that state of mind that is also like, okay, I'm really trying to listen to what's going on, which helps people go into a space of connection and participation that is interesting and I would say perhaps meditative sometimes. Also last quarter, I tried something with the laptop orchestra, also because our class for the first time ever was 8:30 in the morning, very tough for the students to make music, 8:30. So I would start every morning. We had a ritual where I would use this, if you know the musician Brian Eno, famous for his ambient music since the 70s, he has the deck of cards. He has released a deck of cards that he calls Oblique Strategies. It's just a deck of cards. Each card has sort of a slightly enigmatic prompt to help someone like overcome creative block. And they could be very technical or very vague. So I would draw a card they would draw a card each morning, read for themselves, and I would say, take a minute to consider how this card is gonna influence you over the session right now. The cards could be something like, there's an online version. I'll throw it on the chat, you can see later. But things like, find your mistake, do it again. Something like this, for example. Very simple, sometimes funny prompts.
And Bruno, just to interrupt, are all of the prompts words?
They are all words, yes.
See, isn't that cool?
Yes, it comes to what you're saying. Yeah, so basically, yes, we're using
We need
words.
to make our own deck of cards
Yeah,
instead of Arts and Humanities. But we're going to have pictures and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and the third and last thing I was just want to share real quick. Yeah, that would be really cool. Our own deck cards. Third and last thing to share real quick that I'm really like trying to I've been doing for a while, but big shout out, and I'm always deeply thankful to the late American composer Pauline Oliveros. She actually came to Santa Clara 2013 a few years before she passed. And she's the one who coined the term deep listening. Some of you other people have used the term, but she became in the music side well known for that. She calls that a type of meditation through sound, through listening and making sound. And as I talk about listening with my students all the time, I've been more and more like going into reading more from Pauline Oliveros and her work on deep listening. And one example of a prompt that I was hoping to do last week with my students, but it has to be in person, we didn't do it, was the thing she calls the slow walk, which is essentially a sound walk through campus where you take notes of everything you're listening. And there's a few more things to do in the prompt, but eventually we talk about the sounds you listen as you walk, intentionally very slowly, to put your body in that strange space of walking slowly. So that's another example.
Thank you, Bruno. And believe it or not, it is 1:30. I know that many members of this panel have other meetings and appointments to get to, as well as our audience. So I just want to thank all of you again, Kai, Bruno, and Pancho. Thank you so much for your time. Britt, thank you for helping to organize us. And Britt is going to put up on the screen a quick little poll for our audience members, just to help us promote future events. This will help us understand how you learned about today's panel. Thank you again. This will be available as a recording later on the Center for the Arts and Humanities website. And check us out there, subscribe to our newsletter to get updates about forthcoming events. Thanks, everybody.